Okay, so one small problem in our code, and one more thing we need to do in the Facebook portal. So the issue in the Facebook portal, we've actually set it up correctly so far. The one thing we need to do is we do need to set up the redirect URIs. So down here under products, we've been dealing with the basic settings of the app, but if I click on Facebook login and go to settings, I need to specify both my live and local callback URIs. So the message that we're getting here, this message isn't exactly right. It's saying it's a domain problem. It's not actually a domain problem. It's that the callback URIs aren't here. So under Facebook login and settings, we've got client OAuth settings, and there's a text box here for valid OAuth redirect URIs. So this is where we should be supplying both. First, I'll try my local, post 3000, Facebook, callback. It didn't give me an error, so that's encouraging. I'll try to save that. And it says, my error message. It briefly said in that window that won't come back that localhost is automatically allowed. We don't need to, but I do need my live URI. This has got to be with HTTPS. Callback. Your live site /Facebook/callback. And I'll try to save that. And that it will accept. So now I want to try my live site with both my Facebook accounts. The owner of the app, which we know should work, and then I also want to try it with my other Facebook account that isn't connected. I should be able to log into my app on Heroku with either one of these accounts. So again, this was under the Facebook login settings, the valid OAuth redirect URI section. So I'm going to try this. If my code runs, it's still going to create a duplicate user. We have a very tiny bug in our code that's causing the duplicate user, which we should be able to fix. So on my live site, now I'm going to go to my login screen. I'm going to try my Facebook login again. So in this window, I'm already signed in with Facebook. I've already authorized it. So it just takes me in here. I'm going to try it in my private window as well. I'll just start that process again. So we'll load the site. I'll go to login. I'm not signed into Facebook here. I'm going to use my other account. It does not own the Facebook application. And we'll see if I can now get in as just a general Facebook user. So now that I have the proper redirect URI, it asks me if I'm okay sharing my profile. And now I'm logged in with my other Facebook account. If I go and look in MongoDB, I still have my duplicate here. So I've got two Facebook, the same user account in here twice, same exact OAuth ID. There's a very small bug in our code when we're checking for the existing user in our Facebook strategy. So our bug is right here on line 120. As I wrote this code, we said, find the user with this Facebook ID. What's wrong with this? Something's missing from here. We're using our user model. So here's the user model. So what's the problem with line 120? Problem's the word OAuth. What should that be instead? Right. So we called the property OAuth ID. When I wrote the code here, I missed the ID. So that's why it was recreating the same user. Now, if I try one more time with one of my Facebook logins, it should not duplicate that and create a new record again. It should already find that user and use that existing ID. So I'll just try it just to be sure. I'll just push that change again. One more. Before I can get it to run off, to let it push the gate and let Heroku pull that new version. Or I can manually sync it and try one more time, and then I want to make sure in MongoDB that I don't have any more than 11 users. Actually, I won't have 10 because I have another duplicate here. I'll just refresh. I think I still have 2 Herb Tarlic users. I only want to have 1. Yeah, so I've got duplicates. So I should have 10 users. I'll just check that my application's been updated. So just now, okay, so I should be able to log in one more time, log out and log in as Herb without creating a new account. So I'll go out, I'm logged back in, and it didn't duplicate me now. With that little change, we just needed to add that ID onto this variable. So if you're going to enable Facebook in the assignment 2, if you want to do Facebook login, you need to make sure you authorize, turn your app into production. Once you can do it in development mode first and test it with localhost. Once it's working, make sure you put your Facebook app into production. And in the Facebook developer console, add your valid OAuth redirect URI. So that the message that it gave me was a bit misleading. It tripped me up. It was saying it was a domain error, when really what it meant was, what they were trying to tell me was there was no redirect URIs. So the error message they gave us was not really accurate. Claire, you don't see that? So you have the valid URI here, and it's got HTTPS, but you can't save it. Doesn't let you save. So our login with Passport is, we've done everything I wanted to do with it. We could register and sign up locally with Google, with Facebook. We can run this all in the cloud live. There's one last little update to our app I want to do. We didn't have time to address it. And that is when we're editing. What change should we make to this page? What's the problem with it? Here was our form for adding. Right, when we're adding, we created a drop-down list of the countries, but when we're editing, country is just a text box. So this form should also have a drop-down that we're filling from our list of countries and then selecting the right element in the list. So if I click on sushi, this should not be a text box that says Japan. This should be a drop-down list with all the countries from the countries collection, and Japan should be the selected element. So the code in our view needs to change, and we're also going to need to change some of the code in our controller. Unfortunately, in HBS, writing the code in here to pre-select the drop-down isn't something that's built in. We're going to need to basically actually use an NPM package, and we're going to need to do a custom handler in order for us to, we can populate the drop-down, but actually showing the correct value inside it is going to be a little more complicated. But we do have time left to do it. So I'm going to open up my edit view. So going to foods and edit. So right now we just have this text box. We've got an input name equals country on line 10. I'm going to change that to a select box. I'm going to take out the value attribute because the select control has no value property. And then I also want to take out the self-closing tag because we're going to need a series of options here. If we look at our add page, this is what it looks like. We passed in a list of countries and we used an each loop. So we could do this. The problem is there's no way for us to, no efficient way for us to write the logic to pre-select the appropriate country. So we could fill the list, but it's just going to default to whatever the first country we have is. So we're going to need to modify how this works a bit. I also want to open up the food controller. So let's have a look at our get add method for food. Whoops, sorry, that's our countries.js. We want to open up our food controller. So I think we added some of this code last week. So when we were loading our form, we also wanted to use the country model to go and fetch the list of countries. And then we passed that list when we loaded the add view. We passed in that list so we could populate the drop-down list. So we're going to need to do something similar on edit. We need to go and get the list of countries and hand that list to the view. So in our edit, here's our get method. We're getting the list of food, sorry, we're getting the selected food and passing that, but we also now need the country list. So in here, once we find the food, before we load the view, we also want to go and get the list of countries from the database. Get country list, fill drop down. We're going to use our country model. We also want our list of countries sorted alphabetically. So at the end of this, we want to sort alphabetically by country name. So if we can log it. Otherwise, I want to move the res.render statement down here inside of the else. So first we get the selected food, then we get the list of countries. So now our page gets one food item and our list of countries, because we need to display all that stuff in the browser. The country list fills the dropdown, and the food fills the rest of the form. So ideally, if this was some other kind of front end, we could basically do this in our edit view. We'd want to loop through our list of countries, kind of like we're doing here, output each one, but then we'd also want an if statement comparing, is the current country in our loop the same as the food for the country for this food? And if so, we would add the selected attribute to the option tag. Handlebars, unfortunately, by default, it doesn't, the logic is not sophisticated enough to let us do that. When we write an if statement in HBS syntax, all it can tell us is if a variable has a value or not. We actually use this in the in our layout file. So here we checked, we have an if statement, but all this tells us is whether the user object is null or has a value. There's no ability to say if the user is equal to something. So we can't compare the food country to the current element in our list with basic handlebar syntax. It doesn't allow us. So we have to basically write a little extension, a little helper method to do this. So inside of our app.js, I'm just going to stop my site for a second. We actually need to explicitly install the HBS package, so then we can write our own little extension method. I'm not entirely sure it's necessary, because we did say HBS is the view engine, but just to be sure, best that we install this package. So we're going to write a separate method that goes in app.js that we can call from the view, basically that can write the logic we need, where we're comparing two string values together. And if those strings match, we want to add some text to that option tag. We want to write a helper method. Select. Will require HBS. This package has a method called register helper. So we're writing our helper method. But first we give it a name. We'll call it create option. So this method is going to take two parameters. What value are we looking for? Sorry, what's the current value in our loop, and which one are we looking for? So if these match, whoops, sorry. If the two values match, we want to add the text selected to the option. Otherwise, we just add an empty string. Two values match. Then it has a safe string method. We're going to generate an option tag here. We're generating a new option tag every time we call this method. And we're also passing in the value that we're looking for. If those two values are the same, our option tag will also include the word selected. If the values are not the same, it's just going to be an empty option tag. So now we need, inside of our select box, in our loop, we need to call the create option method each time. Sorry, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, selected property, thank you. So we're using these two values to compare. If they're the same, the selected property is equal to selected. If they're different, the selected property is just an empty string. And then we're going to append on that into each option tag. So one of these options will have a selected attribute appended on, and all the others will just be an empty option tag. Now we need to call this method as we loop through our countries in the view. In here, again, we just added this countries variable in our view. So now for each one of these, we want to call our create option method. And we need to pass in two values: the current country value and the country value of this food. So in order, we said the current value is first and the selected value is second. So our current value is this name. For this one, you need to use .. slash because the food variable is declared at the scope above. We're inside the list of countries here. So inside this variable, it doesn't know what the food is. They're declared at the same level. So it's going to compare the current country to the country for this food. It should create a drop-down list with all our countries listed A to Z, and the correct food should have a selected attribute on that option. So we'll try this out. I guess I can go back to running this locally for now. I'll just log in with my local account. And try to edit a food. So it now gives me a drop-down list that's sorted from A to Z, but the correct item is selected. To be sure, we should try a few other foods and make sure they're tagged with the right to the right country. So there's no, if we use HBS as our templating engine, this if logic where we're comparing the countries, we can't do this inside of the view. The if statement is simply going to tell you, does something have a value or is it null? We can't compare two values in HBS structure. So instead, we've got to override this method somehow. And by putting it in my app.js, it's global. So if we have other drop-downs that we need to fill and select an option, again, we can just call the create option method from any view. Pass in two values, and this method will generate an option tag, and it should select when those two values are the same, the option will say selected. So if we go and inspect this, so we have a series of blank option tags except for the one country that matches the country of this food. It gets this space selected appended inside before we close the opening option tag. I meant to get to this to that last week. We didn't quite have a chance. So there will be other things. If ever you need to write other logic in your HBS, you're probably going to have to write a helper because the decision structures are very, very kind of crude and rudimentary. They don't offer much functionality. So this will probably require some research on your part to figure out, okay, this is what I need to do in my UI. How do I use a helper method to write this logic? And I could have written this with like an if else. This is just a bit of a shorthand for doing it. So you could also have written it like this. A simpler way would have been to initialize it to empty and then just line 178 is just a single line version of that little for-line block of code. Initialize it as empty, and when that values match, change it from an empty string to a string that starts with a space and says selected. So these are functionally equivalent. So all the front end and logic of this app is done. Next week, we'll do one last thing with it. It won't be anything in the actual application. We can do it fairly quickly. We'll build out a REST API. So what does this look like as an API with no front end? And how can we integrate that into this solution? And then we'll start with Angular as well, probably the last hour of class. We will have so next week's week 10. So I've been giving you guys quizzes kind of every 3 weeks. So our last review quiz will be next week. So we'll have a quick review quiz on the last 3 classes, the start of class next week. So it'll basically be about mostly around authentication, local Google and Facebook authentication. Basically everything we've covered since the last quiz should be authentication. We'll do the in-class lab, so you'll get a chance to provide some feedback on someone else's assignment too, and you'll get some feedback on your own. We'll do that, we'll do our API, and we'll start with Angular. We want to rebuild this whole thing over 3 weeks as a single page application with an Angular front end. We should be able to get that working before your tutorials. Okay, that's all for today. See you guys next week. Remember, your project plans are due Monday at 5.